Silence as a Strategy. Dr. Jerome Paige on finding purpose in disruption. If you were with us in our last segment, you got a chance to get a real teaser from Jerome Page as he talked to you about the meditativist and all of the disruptions that we've been inundated with and what it really means. How do we unpack that? And how do we utilize it for our greater good? We're back with Jerome Page. And in our last segment, you left us really waiting for you to kind of unveil why. Why is this all happening and what do we do? Can you come back in and share?
Oh, yes, yes. So let me reframe it in terms of my book with my brother, Private Equity State Capitalism, because we introduced several concepts there. We, in the first segment, we talked about my proclivity with words and creating new words. And so one is private equity state capitalism. That's an attempt to define the current governance system that we find so troubling. So that's one. The other concept we include in there is African Americanism, and that concept is thrown in there because, as we talked about in the first segment, a lot of what we're experiencing today is not new, and it's not the point that it's not new if we've seen it before, but our history gives us the tools in which to respond, and that's the purpose. And so the purpose of African Americanism is to distill those tools, those practices that we can apply that Black history 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 300. So it's an attempt to make Black history applied so that we can carry it into our work. And we created what we call the fourfold path. One, if you look at the broad history of African Americanism as we presented in our book, is that what do? We testify. We talk truth to power. We say what's real. So that's the first thing we do. So the first step of the path is to bring witness to what's going on.
Now, there are times where it feels like you can't bring witness. I mean, if you look at one of the strategies of this current regime, as you have stated in our last show, and I really like that terminology, it is honing in on individual dialogue. Like, it's not only group dialogue. If a person posts something on their social media, if they are in conversations, if they protest, there's been a legislative efforts to create mass bans so you can see who's the protester, so that all of this is out on a space where it threatens the voices of the collective and it threatens the voice of the individual. You've had attacks at the legal system. You've had the highest institutions of learning in this country fold and fight and be threatened in unconventional ways. So this isn't an environment that fosters open communication without repercussion. So how do you use words as a way to push back?
Well, one is the success of the regime, and it's been successful so far, is that everybody is responding individually. There hasn't been a collective response. In other words, all the universities haven't responded. So they go after one university, one at a time. All the law firms haven't responded. So they go after one law firm at a time. All the media hasn't responded. So they go after one form of media at the time. There has been no collective action in that sense. And the reason is that because, and I'm not here to blame anybody because I'm still struggling with it, is because this is so new and so raw. In one sense, we're not quite sure what to do and how to respond. But we know that from historically, that on the plantations, were on the in the concentration camps that our people were part of, as you know, the forced labor concentration camps, there was something called hush harbors. People found a way in the midst of all that to create a way to get together and to communicate and share. We know that there were attempts to cut down all communications, but how did the people know the routes to freedom? So the point of looking at African Americanism not as the way to go back to the past, that we've been through periods of erasure. We've been through periods where we've been physically attacked. The question is, what are the lessons we've learned and how do we respond? Right? So, more recently, as you get the cultural studies, women wearing African American or women of African descent wearing braids, we know that were maps to freedom.
Right. I was just thinking about those cornrows being ways for you to communicate.
Right. So the reason that we're disoriented, and rightfully so, is because we haven't yet figured out, and that's the point of one of the points of our book, is that we need to figure out ways to kind of circumvent that and to keep the message going and to recognize what took place in other times when there was attempts at erasure.
Well, that's the very thing that's happening. I mean, you look at Jackie Robinson and how they're trying to just, erase his history while keeping some aspects of his baseball legacy. So it's a sterilized memory, right? And so there's this whole effort to kind of sterilize memory through the banning of books and all of these other types of efforts. How do you create a stronghold when it is the very books that are under attack that are being burned in these virtual squares?
Well, there are books that are being burned and banned in the virtual squares. But how did slaves or the enslaved learn how to read? Again, not that I'm not suggesting we glorify, but the question then is, how do you, we are in part stuck because we live in a surveillance economy, and the technologies and the logarithms can track and search and so forth. But but then there have to be other ways where people get together and talk and share offline. So as long as you're online, and it's being online is important, you can be tracked, you can be monitored. But if you go offline, you can still have your discussions. There are book clubs that are exploding. I mean, not exploding, but expanding. There's the Asala, which is a group that is founded by Carter G. Woodson. They're trying to reestablish the Saturday and the Sunday schools. So part of what we've experienced in retrospect of the last 60 years of the desegregation era was that we had outsourced a lot of what we used to insource. And so now what we have, part of the challenge now is to what can we keep outsourced and what do we have to bring back and make it our own. I know this is not the purpose, but the theme of the movie Sinners, the whole notion of the vampire, is that they wanted Sammy's brilliance, but they didn't want Sammy. So we live in essence a vampire economy. They want our blues, but not our suffering. They want our jazz, but not our challenges. And it's not just for African Americans, is that what they want is to be able to extract anything of value, erase what's part of it, and then take that value and concentrate it in fewer and fewer hands. So it's a struggle and it's a challenge, but I think historically we know how to do this. In that sense, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we do have historical roadmaps for how do you deal with when fascism is in present.
So in that sense, you really could look at the African American themselves as the roadmap, right? Because
And that's the purpose of African Americanism. Is say we are the roadmap. If you study our history, you can see what you need to do in difficult times.
that's
What do
awesome.
you do when they so when we were enslaved, they took our languages, they took our spiritual guides, our gods, our practices. They stripped us of everything. And what did we do? We survived. I mean, it wasn't an easy survival. But as soon as we had the opportunity, we created what they tried to erase, or
Mhm.
not tried to erase, but didn't in fact erase. And then we created new stuff. Now, some of that stuff, can be problematic. When you begin to mix, traditional practices with modern practices, you can get some real weird stuff. But fundamentally, we know what to do.
Right. Well, I thought that was somewhat of the beauty of Sinners, is it took kind of like this gothic story of vampires and integrated it culturally into the African American struggle, and but was also kind of inviting you to try something new while relying on what has been traditional and old. And when I think about, I mean, recently we were tested with this whole idea of nuclear catastrophe globally, and in that thinking, you started to kind of really go historical. You started thinking about the Cold War. You started thinking about how did we get here? How did we started talking about fallout shelters again, and all this language that had kind of been in the backdrop of this new time. And one of the things that I looked at in that was when you talk about this whole concept of nuclear and how do you survive in these times. Like people are starting to talk about, how do you survive radiation, right? And all of this old thinking, this old language, all these things that I remember very much as part of my training in public school in first grade and kindergarten. All of a sudden, this became normalized language to be dug up as people tried to find solutions.
Yeah, I
And
think there instead of sure. I mean, we can bring it. We used to do the drills in junior high, elementary school, and junior high school. I don't think we did it so much in by the time I got to high school. But what climbing under a desk is really going to do if there is an attack? I mean, we know that there could be some people who are saved because of like tornadoes or hurricanes. You're going to get in a safe space. So there are some basic principles of emergency preparedness that you apply across all kinds of disasters. In terms, to what extent do you shelter in place, and to what extent do you leave? And then if you shelter in place, what do you need? And then if you leave, what do you need to take with you? So there's some basic principles of emergency preparedness. But part of the talk is part of the distraction. Part of the talk to bring back this old notion of mutually assured destruction and the mushroom clouds. Nobody going for that. you know, that's that. The question becomes is how are they using that to discipline us, and how are they using that to discipline the world? And that's what you have to be on the lookout. Is how do the language disciplines us in a way that we lose our agency?
well, I think it does two things myself. It's like if you look at it and just looking at it through the lens of meditativism, um, it makes you fearful. On one end, you're fearful, you're out of your mind, you're not focused, you're not looking at solutions, you're in panic state, right? And then in another space, it kind of strips away all these ideas that is this important, is that important, what's really important, what legacy did I leave? It also puts you in. I guess it depends on who you are, but it puts you in that meditative state on what's really important and what have I done and what legacy will I leave for myself or others.
Right. So one of the adages that I use, and I learned this from reading Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy. And the way I set it up is, I live in a relatively economically well-off neighborhood. And so we're in our book club and we're reading Just Mercy. And by the time we get to the end of the book, everybody in the room, we're all distraught. We're freaking out. And so I pose the question is, how is it that we are distraught and disoriented? But Brian Stevens, after all, he's there on the ground and he ends up hopeful, right? So we're not, I've never worked with anybody on death row. I've never worked with anybody who, where their family is going through that. I've never experienced that. He's experienced it and he's hopeful. I haven't experienced it and I'm distraught. So there's a disconnect there, right? And so what I realize, and this gets back to the point, despair is the dis-ease of the disconnected.
Can you say that again?
Despair is the dis-ease of the disconnected. So when those moments when you think all is lost, you have to get connected to yourself. You have to get connected to other people. You have to get connected to your body. You have to get connected. If you're spiritual in nature, you have to get connected to the higher power. It's the lack of connectedness that creates despair. So when you're at the end of whatever you think you are, you have to figure out a way to connect and reestablish connection. It will be difficult. Life will be hard, but you won't have despair. You will.
Well, the good thing about what you're saying is that first you're speaking again about this collaboration, right? Because it's again taking you away from the individual into a plural space, right? But the other thing that you are alluding to is that at the tip of this space of discomfort, there's actually an opening for a new level of awareness of connection that grounds you in this new experience.
Right, exactly. And if we go back to the movie Sinners, at the moment when Sammy hit that note and the roof burned down, we all have portals, and the only way you're going to get through the portal is for the old stuff to give way. And so, once the old stuff gave way, once the roof burned down, once the metaphorically speaking worked down, then you had access to all past and future spirits as a way to sustaining you. And so part of the
and that's actually what they were going for. They said they wanted a way to connect with the spirits. That was the goal. That's why they wanted Sammy.
Correct. They wanted Sammy because Sammy had the key to the portal. But Sammy had his own struggles to get there. So it's out of the struggle that you get this. One struggle was the struggle between he and his father. That was one struggle. And so there's the classic line in the song is that he's filled with the blues and the Holy Ghost. And he did not want to choose between the two. He embraced the two, and when he was able to integrate that. And then when he was faced with the choice toward the end, when Stack came back with Mary and was offered eternal life, he said he didn't want it. He wanted to be human in all its dimensions and to experience it in all of its dimensions. And so the moment that you feel like all is lost, as you rightfully point out, that's the point which the new thing can come up and be born. There are all kinds of sayings across tradition. It's darkest just before the sunrise. There's an old Buddha saying that the barn burned down. Now I can see the moon. So it's what happens is that we are constantly holding on to something that is no longer servicing us. And we haven't quite understood, well, first of all, what the servicing was and why it's no longer serving, and then when to let go. And so we're part of the despair or the difficulties we face now is that we had all these hopes and beliefs. We had, and somebody said, well, that was false in the sense that you were being duped. But there's a new day. There's a new sheriff in town, and you have to adjust to what the realities are.
So it sounds like we're on the verge of a great awakening, as the way you painted it, which is far more enlightening than the bleak conversations that have been stirring around lately. And very excited that we got a chance to be inspired by your talk today. I feel like we've been in a co-meditation the whole time as we talk about silence as strategy. I wanted to just bring in a little bit with your brother, James, some of the work that you've done, but I want people to be able to connect with you post this conversation. You are co-founders of the DC Cultural Narratives Collaborative. How do people get involved with that? How do they learn more?
Okay, well, they'll have to email me so we can provide the email address. So we're an ad hoc group. So we just have an informal structure and we get together. I started a new Substack on May 1st, and it's called The Meditativists. So I encourage, I'm looking for new people to subscribe and to support my efforts there. So if you're on Substack, you can find me. I have a website called What's on Jerome's Mind, and that has several of my passion projects over the years. For what I've done over the last few years is created a year-long project. I did during the pandemic. I did something called the 1960s Project, and what I did was interview people who were in school and high school and came of age in the 1960s as we look back.
That sounds very exciting, particularly because I wasn't here in the 1960s, and I would love to know firsthand what those experiences were and what they lead to. You said you could be contacted via email. Can you leave your email for us? I know we'll probably put it up on the screen, but I just want to at least have you say it.
Okay, it's Jerome Paige, all one, at gmail.com. Jerome Paige at gmail.com. That's the easiest one. I have a whole list of others, but that's the easiest one to remember. It's okay. Jerome Paige, all one word, at gmail.com.
Well, Dr. Paige, this has been a very enlightening and also a provoking conversation in many ways. It is good to speak with you about silence as a strategy, finding purpose in disruption. And I look forward to actually exploring more of your work, as I'm sure others are who are listening to this profound conversation today.
Yeah, we just remember we all need to go back to where we were in terms of learning and rediscover hush harbors.